Okay, so picture this, a superpower, right up there with ancient Egypt. They built these colossal cities, they basically pioneered international law, and then, poof, they just vanish. So completely that for 3,000 years, they were basically just a rumor, a whisper in some old texts. This is the incredible story of the Hittites, the empire that history forgot.
I mean, that quote just says it all, right? We're not talking about some little kingdom that just kind of faded out. No, this was a major player, a dominant force on the world stage. And they were almost totally, completely erased from memory.
So how does that even happen? How does a superpower just disappear? That's the huge question we're going to dig into. It's an amazing story of discovery, of incredible power, and a total collapse that, believe it or not, has some pretty surprising lessons for us today.
All right, so let's set the stage. Who were these people? We're talking about the Hittites. They were an Indo-European people, and their home base was in Anatolia. That's modern-day Turkey. And from there, they built one of the absolute greatest empires of the late Bronze Age.
And this is what really puts their disappearance into perspective. I mean, everybody's heard of Ramesses II, right? New Kingdom Egypt, the pyramids, the whole deal. Well, the Hittites were their biggest rivals. They went toe-to-toe with them at the famous Battle of Kadesh and fought them to a standstill. They controlled a massive territory for 500 years. But while Egypt is everywhere in our history books, the Hittites, they just became a footnote. It's wild.
So how did we even find out about them again? Well, the story of how this ghost was brought back to life is just a fantastic piece of historical detective work, and it took almost 100 years to solve.
Yeah, it wasn't one big aha moment. It all started back in 1834. This French explorer, Charles Texier, he's just wandering around and stumbles on the ruins of this absolutely massive, unknown city. For decades, nobody knew who built it. Then, a scholar named Archibald Sayce starts connecting the dots, pulling clues from all over the Middle East, and he makes this bold claim. He says these have to be the ruins of the lost Hittite Empire. But the real smoking gun, the final proof, didn't come until 1906, with an archaeologist named Hugo Winkler.
Now, even before Winkler's big dig, this tiny little silver seal was a massive piece of the puzzle. Think of it like a mini Rosetta Stone. Why? Because it had writing on it in 2 different languages. One was Akkadian cuneiform, which scholars could already read, and the other was this mysterious local hieroglyphic script. This was huge. It proved that all this weird art and these massive ruins scattered across the region, they all belonged to one single, unified, literate civilization. And this number, 10,000, that's what Hugo Winkler found when he started digging in the royal citadel of Hattusa. 10,000 clay tablets. It was their entire royal archive. Suddenly, historians could read their laws, their private letters between kings, even their own copy of that famous peace treaty with Egypt. It was incredible. A forgotten world was literally speaking to us again.
Okay, so we found them. What did all these tablets actually tell us? Well, they revealed a state that was incredibly sophisticated and incredibly powerful.
See, the Hittites weren't just about brute force. Sure, their capital, Hattusa, was this mighty fortress. But get this, they also called it the City of 1,000 Gods. Why? Because whenever they conquered a new people, they just added those people's gods to their own pantheon. Their military was famous for its terrifying chariots, but honestly, their politics and laws were maybe even more impressive. You had a king and a queen who shared power, a council of nobles to keep them in check, and a legal system that was all about compensation, not just eye for an eye revenge. Pretty advanced stuff.
And if you want the perfect example of just how sophisticated they were, look no further than the Treaty of Kadesh. Like we said, they fought Egypt to a bloody draw. But instead of pushing for total destruction, what did they do? They negotiated. They made a deal. And that document is the earliest written peace treaty we've ever found, anywhere in the world. That tells you everything you need to know about their mastery of diplomacy.
Which, of course, brings us to the second huge mystery. Around 1200 BCE, they're at the absolute peak of their power, their superpower. And then, all of a sudden, they just implode. It's over. What on earth happened?
For a long time, the answer seemed pretty simple. There was this mysterious group of raiders called the Sea Peoples. The story went that they just swept across the Mediterranean, burning everything down. And look, they definitely played a part. But what we know now is that the Sea Peoples were more of a symptom of the collapse, not the only cause. The real story is that it was a perfect storm of disasters, all hitting at the exact same time. Okay, so let's break it down. The empire was already stretched thin. It was fighting invasions on multiple fronts. It was dealing with civil wars and rebellions from the inside, and, as if that wasn't enough, we now know the whole region was being rocked by a series of major earthquakes. But the final nail in the coffin, the knockout blow, that was something else. A scientific smoking gun that was hidden away for over 3,000 years.
So how do we find it? Get this. In a study that just came out in 2023, scientists looked at the rings of 3,200-year-old juniper trees from that area. Tree rings are basically a perfect climate record, year by year. And what they showed about the last few years of the Hittite Empire? Well, it's absolutely chilling.
3. That's the number. The tree rings showed 3 straight years of a severe, off-the-charts mega-drought that hit the Hittite heartland, from 1198 to 1196 BCE, 3 years in a row.
And as one of the study's authors, Britta Lorentzen, put it, the Hittites were a resilient people. They had emergency grain stores, they had water reservoirs, they could absolutely handle one bad year. Maybe even 2. But there was just no way to prepare for 3 consecutive years of almost complete crop failure. The food just ran out.
And that drought triggered a complete domino effect. First comes the famine. Then, economic collapse. I mean, you can't collect taxes on grain that was never grown. With no money to pay the army, the soldiers just left. They deserted their posts, and suddenly the borders are wide open for groups like the Sea Peoples to just waltz right in. And the worst part? The Hittite heartland was landlocked. They had no easy way to ship in food from somewhere else. They were completely and utterly trapped.
So the great capital, Hadissa, was burned and abandoned. The empire was just gone. But what was left? And what can a story this old possibly teach us?
Well, what's interesting is that while the empire vanished, the culture itself didn't die out completely, not overnight. It kind of shattered. For the next 500 years, these smaller little kingdoms, what we call the Neo-Hittite states, they kept things going in southern Anatolia and Syria. They kept using Hittite art, Hittite writing, a final faint echo of that lost world, before they were eventually swallowed up by the next big kid on the block, the Assyrians.
But I think the real takeaway comes from why they collapsed. As one of the scientists on that tree ring study said, it really makes you think about resilience. The Hittites had survived everything: wars, plagues, civil unrest. But a long, severe climate shock was the one thing that pushed their incredibly complex society right over the edge. And you know, that really forces you to look around and ask, what are our breaking points today?
And that leaves us with one last, kind of chilling thought. The story of the Hittites proves that even the mightiest civilizations can be incredibly fragile. Their entire world was lost for 3,000 years. It's a powerful reminder that history, well, it has a way of burying even its greatest empires. And it really makes you wonder, could a modern empire be forgotten?